The Stark Varg has been banned from X Games, banned from FIM Superenduro, locked out of every AMA-sanctioned event in the country, and when the FIM finally let it race in the 2025 World Supercross Championship, they handicapped it so hard the rulebook read like a punishment. The Varg had to weigh a minimum 257 pounds, 37 pounds heavier than a 450cc ice bike, and its power was capped at 54 kilowatts. That's a governing body adding ballast and cutting power to the same bike. Think about that. What the Varg actually is. The Stark Varg runs an 80 horsepower electric motor and delivers 938 newton meters of torque at the rear wheel. The production bike weighs 260 pounds fully charged, and to put that torque number in plain English, 938 newton meters is approximately 692 pound-feet at the rear wheel. For reference, the Racing MX 1.2 variant bumps that figure to 973 newton meters, closer to 717 pound-feet. Your neighbor's F-150 doesn't make that much torque. The motor runs on 360 volts nominal voltage, spins to 14,200 revolutions per minute, and the whole unit weighs 9 kilograms, about 20 pounds. Stark claims 9 horsepower per kilogram of motor weight, and the system runs at over 95% efficiency across the majority of the power range. Compare that to a factory 450. A KTM 450 SXF or a Yamaha YZ 450F makes 55 to 60 horsepower at peak, but that peak is up at 9,000 to 10,500 revolutions per minute. You have to earn it through the rev range. The power band exists in a window. Below it, you're soft. Above it, you're falling off the pipe. The Varg doesn't have a pipe, it doesn't have a power band. Unlike a gas engine that builds revs, the Varg delivers full torque the instant you touch the throttle. It's a direct telepathic connection between your wrist and the rear wheel. 0 revolutions per minute to full torque, instant. That is not a performance advantage in the traditional sense. That is a different physics. And that distinction is exactly what's broken every rulebook that's tried to contain it. Basically, a cheat code. Why the AMA rulebook doesn't fit. The Stark Varg is currently not eligible to compete in any AMA-sanctioned event. Its 400-volt battery exceeds the 60-volt DC limit specified in Rule 1.2.D.1.8.H.6. That rule was written for electric bicycles and low-voltage kids' bikes, not 80-horsepower race machines running on 400-volt systems. The Varg's voltage is 6.5 times over the AMA's limit. It's not a gray area. The bike is operating in a completely different electrical tier, closer to a Formula E car than to a KTM Freeride EXC. The AMA didn't ban the Varg because it's dangerous or because someone proved it was unfair, but because the box it needed to check, voltage class, was written before this bike existed. The deeper problem is that AMA rulebooks are organized around displacement. A 454 stroke, a 252 stroke. Displacement defines the class, the weight minimum, the power expectation. An electric motor has no displacement. There is no cubic centimeter equivalent for instantaneous flat torque from 0 RPM. The entire classification system has no hook to hang this bike on. The FIM Superenduro disaster. 6-time FIM Superenduro world champion Teddy Blazeusiak spent 2 days testing the Varg ahead of round 1 of the 2024 FIM Superenduro World Championship, where he was slated to compete. After arriving in Lieven, France, Stark Racing director Sébastien Tortelli was informed by the FIM that the rules had been changed and electric motorcycles were banned from racing. FIM regulations had quite clearly allowed electric bikes. The 2023 FIM electric regulations document listed required features for electric motorcycle entry, including a secondary safety lanyard that cuts high voltage if separated from the rider. Stark personnel believed their bike met all those requirements, and their engineers had been in contact with the FIM during the Varg's testing and development. The FIM gave no technical explanation, no appeal process, no timeline for resolution. They told the team to pack up and go home. The night before round 1, Stark cited safety concerns as the stated reason, despite the FIM having already established electric regulations and approved the Varg's participation. That's not a safety call. A safety call happens in the design phase, during homologation, during months of documented communication, not at midnight in a French arena. The Taddy situation looked exactly like what it was. Institutional panic from a sanctioning body that suddenly realized the bike might actually be competitive. The BOP problem. Why you can't just write a rule. Balance of performance, BOP, or what the FIM calls equivalence of technology, is a concept borrowed from endurance car racing and MotoGP's multi-class setups. The idea is simple. If two fundamentally different technologies are competing, you adjust power and weight until the lap times converge. Dial one down, ballast the other up until they're equivalent on track. For the 2025 World Supercross Championship, the FIM's BOP rules set a minimum weight of 257 pounds, a minimum wheelbase of 57 inches, a maximum battery power of 54 kilowatts for the 450 class and 44 kilowatts for the 250 class, and required data logging equipment to monitor compliance. Capping the Varg at 54 kilowatts is roughly 72 horsepower, less than the 80 horsepower it runs at full chat, but still higher than most 450s on the same starting line. Seems workable, except BOP assumes the two technologies are similar enough in character that adjusting power and weight will produce equivalent on-track results. That assumption breaks with the Varg. Here's why. A 450 makes its power in a curve. There is a right gear for every section of a motocross track. Clutch up into a rhythm section, short shift into the corners, pin it off the berm, blip for the next jump. A skilled rider is constantly managing where in the power band they are, and that management is itself a skill that separates fast riders from very fast riders. The Varg has no gears, no clutch. It has over 100 ride modes. You can adjust the power curve, engine braking, flywheel effect, and traction control on the fly. You can literally program the torque delivery to simulate a 2-stroke or 4-stroke power band if you want to. But the underlying hardware is delivering instant, flat torque from 0 revolutions per minute, regardless of what mode you're in. You can cap the peak horsepower with the BOP rule. You cannot cap the shape of the power curve. A software-limited 54 kilowatt Varg still hits full torque at 0 throttle input. A 450 at the same watt-equivalent peak power still needs to be in the right rev range for that torque to arrive. The X Games situation, where physics became visible. At X Games Ventura 2024, Patrick Evans, Pat Bowden, and Colby Raha competed on Stark Vargs across multiple disciplines. Evans won gold in Moto X Best Whip, and Raha took silver in Moto X Quarter Pipe High Air, the first time electric bikes had medaled at X Games. Then, ahead of the 2025 season, X Games organizers confirmed that electric dirt bikes would be banned from all competition classes. The stated rationale, leveling the playing field. In Best Whip, the physics of the Varg are not subtle. A gas bike carries rotational inertia in its flywheel, clutch basket, transmission gears, and crankshaft assembly. That rotational mass resists direction change. When you throw a whip, you're fighting the gyroscopic resistance of all that spinning hardware. It's why Best Whip has always been a brute force discipline. You muscle the bike sideways against its own momentum. Electric bikes carry lower reciprocating mass. Their lower weight distribution allows them to rotate and perform tricks in ways that only electrics can achieve. The Varg's 9-kilogram motor has dramatically less rotational inertia than a 450's entire drivetrain assembly. The bike wants to rotate. Riders on Vargs were throwing whips that looked physically impossible, not because the riders were supernaturally talented, but because the machine's inertia characteristics were fundamentally different from anything a gas bike can offer. The X Games didn't reach out to Stark to discuss the ban. The rulebook was simply updated and sent out, with the electric motorcycle prohibition bolded in the first technical rule. A bike that won gold was retroactively classified as not belonging in the competition that it won. The official language cited formats designed around gas-powered bikes. What that means in plain English is, the Varg was so good at whips that it was making the established gas bike riders look comparatively restrained, and that made the wrong people uncomfortable. Where it has been allowed to run, and what happened. Jack Brunel won the 2024 British Arena Cross Championship on a Varg, and Stark took the manufacturer's championship as well. British Arena Cross isn't an FIM-sanctioned event at the global level, so it ran without the political overhead of the major bodies. The Varg went in, raced ICE bikes head-to-head, and won the title outright. At the opening round of the 2025 to 2026 FIM Superenduro series, the same series that banned Taddy 2 years earlier, Eddie Carlson earned Stark's first Superenduro podium in Poland. The FIM had by then established working BOP rules for Superenduro, and Carlson podiumed under them. That's a significant data point. When the governing body actually does the regulatory work, instead of banning first and asking questions never, the bike can compete at elite level without the roof caving in. The manufacturer politics layer. The Varg is built by Stark Future, a small startup out of Spain with a Swedish founder. They don't have exhaust sponsors or a service department selling top-end rebuild kits every 40 hours. One line of thinking in the racing community is that the big OEM manufacturers could be innovating and could have an electric platform on the track today. But the only companies willing to try are small independents like Stark. Honda, Yamaha, KTM, Husqvarna, none of them have a production electric motocross bike competitive at this level. If the Varg races in AMA Supercross and wins a round, it doesn't just beat a YZ450F. It makes the entire ICE drivetrain ecosystem, carbs, premix, jetting, transmission, clutch, fuel tanks, radiators, look like legacy hardware. At Loretta Lynn's, the most important amateur motocross event in the country, electric bikes remain banned in all adult and vet classes. The only electric bikes allowed are KTM's electric 50 cubic centimeter models. In the kids class, because KTM is a manufacturer partner, that's the clearest look at the machinery of these decisions. It's not about safety, it's not about fair competition, it's about which manufacturers are at the table. What a real BOP rule would require. For a genuine equivalence framework to work, one that lets the Varg race without either sandbagging or dominating, you'd need to control three things that current rule sets don't address simultaneously. First, peak power, measured in kilowatt, capped at a tested equivalent to the class's ICE machine. The FIM's 54 kilowatt cap for SX1 is a reasonable starting point. Second, torque delivery rate, essentially how fast full torque arrives from zero throttle input. This is the unaddressed variable. You'd need to mandate a minimum rise time in the power curve so the Varg's instant torque delivery is smoothed to something closer to the transient response of a 450. The technology to do this via software already exists on the bike. The Varg's ride mode system can already simulate power band shape. The FIM just needs to mandate a minimum rise time and verify it with the data logging they've already written into the rules. Third, weight standardized across technologies. The current FIM approach of making the Varg heavier than a 450 is backwards thinking. It penalizes a bike for being well engineered. The right approach is a single class minimum weight for all technologies and let the engineers figure out how to meet it, not add lead ballast to the lighter machine. The data logging requirement the FIM wrote into the 2025 WSXBOP rules is the most intelligent piece of that framework. Sensors monitor compliance in real time throughout competition. That's the right foundation. Apply it to torque delivery curve, not just peak output, and you've got a framework that actually addresses what makes the Varg different from a 450, rather than one that just punishes it for being good. The Varg got banned for breaking the physics the rulebook was built around, but Stark is not the only one who's done that. Yamaha mounted their 450 engine backwards, reversed the crankshaft rotation, and built the most controversial factory bike in modern motocross, from inside the establishment. Nobody banned it, they just couldn't beat it. That video is on screen now.